Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to a new episode of our Letter to Voxes podcast. We are launching a truly deep dive today, going right to the foundations of, well, almost everything in Western philosophy. We're going to challenge ourselves to understand the immense intellectual architecture built by one man.
A man whose influence is, you could argue, pretty much unmatched.
Exactly. We're talking about Plato.
Indeed, it's almost impossible to discuss philosophy or political theory or even math and theology without, at some point, tracing a line back to this Athenian thinker.
Right. And our mission today is to move past the usual textbook summaries. We're going to use the sources we have, historical analyses, philosophical critiques, and deep reads of his main works to really trace the path he forged.
And it was a path with a very specific destination. He was trying to solve what he saw as philosophy's most urgent crisis.
That's a great way to put it. I mean, if you just look around the world, everything is changing, right? Moral customs shift, beauty fades, governments rise and fall.
Nothing stays still.
So if you can't trust your senses or the culture you live in, what can you trust? That feeling, that fundamental instability is really the engine that drives his entire, and I mean radical, system.
Precisely. The core challenge Plato faced, and he inherited a lot of this from his teacher, Socrates, was how to build an unshakable foundation for truth. This meant drawing a crystal clear line between absolutely secure, undeniable knowledge, what the Germans might call Wissen.
Right, like hard facts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And on the other side of that line, the messy, conventional, constantly changing world of mere belief or opinion, the Meinungen.
And if you can't make that distinction stick, then everything just falls apart. If morality and justice are just opinions, then they're subjective.
They just dissolve under any real pressure. So he wasn't just, building a cool theory for fun. He was desperately searching for the fixed points in a spinning universe. That really captures the high intellectual stakes. He needed objective, eternal certainties to save morality and knowledge from total chaos.
Okay, so let's start with the man himself. We're talking about Plato. He was born into a prominent, propertied family in Athens.
An aristocrat, through and through.
Yes, and while the exact date is a bit debated, sources generally place his birth around 428 or 427 BCE. There's an alternative date a few years later, but that's the ballpark. He was basically groomed for a life in politics.
But then he met Socrates, and everything changed.
Completely. And his early focus, which you can see so clearly in his earliest writings, was defined entirely by the Socratic method. These early dialogues aren't trying to give you answers.
Not at all. They're designed to be corrosive tools. They aim to expose your own assumptions. They show you why your common, everyday ideas about things like courage or justice are often contradictory or just useless when you really press them.
It's like an intellectual trauma, in a way. You walk in thinking you know what justice is, and you walk out realizing you know absolutely nothing. That's the famous Socratic sting, right? Moving you from this comfortable illusion of knowledge
To the honest confession of non-knowledge. It's deeply humbling, but it's philosophically productive. The whole goal was to clear the intellectual ground.
Because once Plato saw that you couldn't rely on conventional wisdom or what your senses tell you, because those things are always changing, he knew he needed a new foundation for something as important as ethics.
That need for reliability must have been enormous. There's an existential intellectual demand. And that urgency is what defines his shift into his middle period of writing. It's what led him directly to his most famous and maybe most complex idea, the Idean layer.
The theory of forms.
The theory of forms. If truth doesn't exist in the physical world, he figured it must exist somewhere else.
And we know his interest wasn't purely abstract. Later in his life, Plato really tried to bridge this gap between philosophy and actual governance. His travels, especially his time with Dionysius I of Syracuse.
Which did not go well.
Not at all. But that experience and meeting the Pythagorean philosopher Archytas of Tarentum, it all profoundly influenced his political thinking.
He saw geometry and mathematics, thanks to the Pythagoreans, as keys to understanding ultimate reality. And that, combined with his very frustrating political experiences, just fueled his desire to see philosophical principles based on absolute knowledge, not just opinion applied directly to running a state.
So the ideal state wasn't just a thought experiment. For him, it was the ultimate practical application of the eternal truth he was searching for. So let's jump headfirst into the solution he came up with, the theory of forms, which was his answer to the problem of change and instability.
Okay.
If we look at the world around us, the sensible world, objects, people, even acts of virtue, they are all constantly changing. They're born, they decay, they die, a beautiful vase shatters, a just law gets repealed.
Right. So if true knowledge has to be certain and permanent, it absolutely cannot be based on these fleeting physical things we experience with our senses.
So where is it based?
Well, Plato's radical conclusion was that true knowledge has to refer only to things that are incorporeal, unchanging, and eternal. These things must exist in a separate, purely spiritual world, totally inaccessible to our five senses.
And these are the forms or ideas?
These are the forms. They are the primal and perfect prototypes, the and Vorbilder, the original blueprints of all the sensible, imperfect things we encounter in our physical lives.
So let me see if I have this right. If I see 100 different dogs, one is small, one is old, one is sick, they all share in some kind of essential dogness.
Yes.
And the idea of dogness is what is perfect and eternal and unchanging, while the actual physical dogs are just imperfect copies that are, participating in that perfection somehow.
That's the key mechanism, participation. He used a few foundational terms to describe this essence. We often use the term eidos, which means something like original pattern or blueprint. Then there's ousia, which refers to the essence, the wesen of a thing, what it truly is, independent of how it appears to us physically. These forms are the perfect, essential reality. Everything else is just an imperfect physical reflection of them.
Okay, here's the big problem, isn't it? If the forms exist in this purely spiritual realm, how on earth does a human being trapped in a physical body getting information only through their eyes and ears? How do we access that perfect world? That seems like a major hurdle.
It is the hinge upon which the entire system turns. And this is where his doctrine of the immortal soul becomes absolutely indispensable. Plato argues for the soul's pre-existence and its immortality. He grants it participation in the world of ideas. The soul, before it was imprisoned in the body, directly beheld these forms.
So access to what he calls absolute Wahrheit, absolute truth, it's already inside of us.
Precisely. It's a memory.
Yeah.
And through focused philosophical effort and a really rigorous education, which is basically a cleansing process, the soul can learn to turn away from the distractions of the body and the senses.
And remember.
It can remember the truths it once knew. It recognizes its true eternal destiny, and in doing so, finds orientation for all the critical questions of life, virtue, and death.
He didn't just state this, though. He offered some powerful justifications for the soul's immortality, famously in texts like the Phaedon. Let's unpack the three main proofs our sources point to, starting with the cyclical nature of life.
Right, this is an argument from cosmic necessity. Plato suggests that everything that comes into being has to come from its opposite state. If it didn't, existence would eventually just run down into one static condition.
Like a battery running out.
Kind of. So if life comes from death, and passing away comes from coming to be, there has to be a perpetual cycle. If death is the end of life, then life in turn must be generated from death. This implies that souls have to exist in some separate state both before and after bodily life, just to keep this cosmic balance going.
To keep the universe in motion. Okay, that makes sense. Now, the second proof, the argument from recollection or anamnesis, this is the really famous one because it links the soul's pre-existence directly to the forms.
This is where the theory becomes so profoundly intellectual. Anamnesis says that true learning isn't acquiring new information. It's a process of remembering the perfect ideas the soul knew before it was born.
And he demonstrates this in the Menon, right, with the slave boy.
A stunning demonstration. Socrates questions an uneducated slave boy about geometry. And through very careful, persistent questioning, and he never gives the boy the answer, he only guides him to spot contradictions in his own thinking, the boy is able to correctly deduce a pretty complex geometric theorem.
The knowledge was just latent. It was in there. It just needed to be jogged free.
Exactly. If the boy had never been formally taught geometry, and the knowledge clearly wasn't coming from his sensory experience on Earth, where did it come from? It must have been innate.
So this innate knowledge is the proof that the soul had access to the eternal mathematical form of the square before it was even born.
Yes. And for Plato, this means things like geometry, mathematics, even moral concepts. They aren't human inventions, they're eternal memories. And that's a powerful justification for an objective, non-sensory truth.
Okay, and the third argument, it focuses on the soul's own nature.
Yes, the argument from affinity. Plato says the soul is inherently like the forms. It's simple, indivisible, eternal. It's akin to the divine.
Whereas the body...
Body is the opposite. It's a composite, it's always changing, and it's subject to decay. So physical evils like a disease or an injury, they can only corrupt the body.
But they can't touch the soul.
He argues they can't. The soul's own corruption, something like injustice, might damage its virtue or well-being, but it can't destroy its essential, simple existence. The soul is impervious to destruction by bodily death, which confirms its enduring divine nature.
This whole search for the forms, for the immortal soul, for that unshakable foundation, it leads us directly into Plato's biggest and most comprehensive work, the Republic, or Politeia.
It really is the centerpiece. This is the text where he tries to weave everything together. Life, politics, philosophy, all of it driven by this single, relentless search for a perfect, enduring definition of justice.
The dialogue starts off pretty conventionally, though. They're just discussing popular ideas about justice. You have the old man, Cephalus, who suggests justice is basically just, following social customs.
Paying your debts and telling the truth.
Right. But Socrates, of course, immediately shows why that's not enough. Because there are situations where paying a debt, like giving a weapon back to a man who's gone insane, would actually be unjust.
And then you get the really sharp, cynical challenge from Thrasymachus. He doesn't bother with social niceties at all. He just comes out and says it. Justice is the interest of the stronger.
He claims that injustice, if you do it effectively and on a massive scale, like a successful tyrant, is actually a virtue. It's a sign of superior wisdom.
Thrasymachus is just brute pragmatism. He's saying that the perfectly unjust man, the one who can successfully maintain a public reputation for being just, will be the happiest, the wealthiest, and the most powerful. He cuts right to the heart of it. Why on earth would you be just if being unjust is more profitable?
That sounds a lot like the real world, doesn't it? How can Plato possibly argue against that kind of cynicism?
He can't just dismiss it. He has to dismantle it by showing that injustice, even if it's profitable on the outside, actually damages the person on the inside.
And this challenge gets refined by the other characters, Glaucon and Adimantus. They demand proof.
They say, okay, Socrates, prove to us that justice benefits the soul of the person who has it intrinsically, for its own sake, regardless of any rewards or reputation it might bring from men or from the gods.
That's the pivotal moment. And since justice is too abstract and hard to see clearly inside an individual's soul, Socrates agrees they have to magnify it. They have to find it first in the larger, more visible structure of the state.
And that analogy between the outer state and the inner individual, the politeia, that becomes the governing structure for the rest of the book.
So first we have to understand the inner state, the division of the soul. Plato divides the mind into three elements, arguing that real justice is all about the propping relationship between these parts.
Yes, this is laid out in Book 4 of the Politeia.
Let's detail that internal structure.
Okay, so first we have the rational element. This is the highest, most divine part of you. It's concerned only with seeking truth, calculating what's best, and ruling over your impulses.
The head.
The head.
Ah.
Second, there's the spirited or passionate element, the themos. This is the source of courage, of indignation at injustice, of self-assertion. Plato sees this element, your lion heart, as the natural ally of reason. It's the part that fights against your baser impulses. It's what makes you feel shame or righteous anger.
And finally, the unruly horse pulling the chariot.
Yeah.
The appetites.
The desiring element, or appetite. This is the largest and most tumultuous part of the soul. It covers all our bodily desires. Necessary ones, like basic thirst and hunger, but also the unnecessary luxurious wants, like craving rich food, fancy parties, and excessive wealth.
And internal justice, correct, Kite? It's not about getting rid of the appetites, is it? It's about establishing a clear hierarchy.
Precisely. Justice in an individual is achieved when these three parts are in harmony, when each part does its own job without interfering with the others. Reason rules the spirited element, and both of them work together to control the desiring element.
It's like a well-run city inside your own mind.
That's a perfect way to put it. This internal harmony is well-being in the soul. And injustice, then, is just the opposite. It's a civil war within the soul where the inferior parts rebel and take over. It's a functional disease.
Okay, so now we map this internal structure onto the external state. To build his ideal state, Socrates starts with this idea of natural difference and the division of labor, one man, one job, which creates this highly specialized, very simple society.
This is what he calls the initial, simple, or healthy state. It's just a community of farmers, builders, and simple craftsmen, all living very sober lives, content with the basics.
But Glaucon immediately rejects this. He famously calls it a city of pigs.
He says it lacks any of the comforts or luxuries of real Athenian life. He wants sofas, spices, arts, and sweetmeats.
And by rejecting that simple life, it forces this crucial transition to what Plato calls the luxurious or fevered state.
Yes. Once you accept luxury, the state has to swell with complexity. Suddenly you need more professions, doctors to treat all the diseases of luxury, actors, tutors, poets, and all of this requires more territory, which inevitably leads to war.
And that means you need a professional military class.
Exactly. And it's only in this complex, fevered state, which really mirrors the complex, conflicted soul of an unjust person, that the true nature of both justice and injustice can finally be seen clearly.
Okay, before we dive into the truly radical design of this ideal state, let's just take a quick pause.
Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoy this podcast.
It really does help us out. So we've established the foundation, the forms, the soul, the need for a just state, but now we have to confront the really shocking policies required to maintain this complex, fevered city.
And they are shocking. So in this luxurious state, the highest class, which corresponds to the rational and spirited parts of the soul, has to be the guardian class. These are the rulers and their military auxiliaries, and their qualities have to be very specific.
They have to be fierce against enemies, but gentle toward their own citizens.
The analogy of the well-bred watchdog is perfect here. It has to be dangerous and courageous, but also loyal and gentle to its own family. And the only way to synthesize these contradictory traits, Plato argues, is for the guardian to be a philosopher, a lover of learning and truth, combined with a naturally spirited and courageous nature.
This brings us to the middle books of the Republic, where Socrates lays out the three waves or paradoxes. These are the shocking laws that have to be accepted if the state is ever going to be perfect.
They're designed to shatter conventional society.
The first wave is about the role of women, which must have been just stunningly radical for 4th century BCE Athens.
It was revolutionary, the equality of the sexes in political and military roles. Plato argues that if women are going to do the same jobs as men, including governing and fighting in wars, they must get the exact same education, music and gymnastics.
He's saying that the physical difference between men and women doesn't mean they have different political aptitudes.
That's his point. He says the difference, in begetting and bearing children doesn't dictate separate roles or different natures in terms of aptitude.
So while women might generally be weaker, a specific woman could still be better suited for the guardian role than a specific man.
Precisely. Aptitude is distributed across the whole population, regardless of sex. And since the goal is the utility of the state, they are the same in kind as men, just differing in degree of capacity. So the guardians, both men and women, must live in common houses and eat together to maximize their focus on the public good.
Okay, that's the first wave. The second one, the community of families and property, feels even more shocking. This is a total removal of private life for the ruling class.
Yes. The unity of the state is declared to be the greatest good, and private interest is the source of all political division and corruption. Therefore, the guardians are not allowed to have private property or a conventional family. They get only the bare necessities to live.
I mean, it's incredibly radical. And then the third wave, the most famous one, is the most challenging of all. The philosopher king.
Cities will never cease from ill until kings are philosophers or philosophers are kings. This is the great wave that he says threatens to swamp the entire argument.
And he's very specific about what a philosopher is. It's not just someone who loves books.
Not at all. A true philosopher is a lover of the knowledge of the eternal, unchanging forms, the true essence of things. They hate falsehood. They are spectators of all time and all existence. Their souls are so absorbed in contemplating the unchangeable that they are uniquely qualified to lead a city of changing, temporary human beings.
To create these rarefied philosophical guardians, the state has to adopt a system of radical education, which will really mean severe censorship of culture. Why is that necessary?
Because the state must ensure that the very fiber of the citizens' souls, especially the young guardians, is shaped in the right way, reflecting the harmony of the forms. First on the chopping block is the censorship of mythology. The poets, even revered figures like Homer and Hesiod, have to be excluded or radically reformed, because their stories about the gods like Uranus and Cronus and Zeus fighting, lying, or committing immoral acts are impious, they're false, and they make death seem fearful.
So the gods have to be presented as morally perfect examples.
Exactly. Plato lays down two unbreakable principles of divinity. God must be shown only as the author of good, never of all things, and God must be unchangeable and incapable of falsehood. Lying is prohibited, especially what he calls the lie in the soul, which is the deepest form of deception, corrupting your own highest truth.
And this control goes beyond stories. It extends even to aesthetics, to music and art. Why would the state care about musical
The
scales?
censorship of arts and music is severe because art is imitation. And imitation for Plato focuses on the inferior emotional part of the soul, the appetites and the spirited element. It encourages instability. Only simple, harmonious music that promotes discipline is allowed.
He rejects certain types of music?
Oh, yes. He rejects complex harmonies like the Lydian mode, which was associated with sadness and softness, and the Ionian mode, associated with luxurious feasting.
So specific emotional states are literally banned from the airwaves.
Basically, yes. The only modes allowed are the Dorian, which he thought was suitable for courage and warfare, and the Phrygian for peaceful, temperate feelings. Complex instruments like the multi-stringed flute are banned because they encourage varied, emotional, uncontrollable feelings. The goal is to make sure the external harmony of the culture reflects and reinforces the internal harmony of the soul.
So we've established that the philosopher king has to rule because they are the only ones who possess true knowledge. But the ultimate knowledge isn't just about the forms of justice or beauty. It's knowledge of the single, supreme principle that makes all the other forms real and knowable.
And that brings us to the absolute peak of Plato's entire metaphysical and epistemological system, the idea of good.
The idea of good.
It's the highest object of knowledge. It's something every person has a presentiment of, even if they can't define it. It's what gives reality to all the other forms, and it's what makes them intelligible to the human mind. In fact, Plato suggests that without understanding the idea of good, no one has any real knowledge of anything at all.
It's a really abstract, transcendental idea. To explain it, he uses the famous analogy of the sun.
Right, from Book 6 of the Politeia. Think of the sun. In the visible world, the sun is the cause of sight and the cause of light. But the sun itself isn't light, and it isn't sight.
Okay.
In the intellectual world, the idea of good works in the same way. It is the cause of knowledge and truth, making the forms knowable to the soul. But, and this is the critical part, the good is beyond knowledge and truth in dignity and power.
Wait, if it's the cause of knowledge, how can it be beyond knowledge?
Because it's also the source of being and growth itself. It provides the forms with their very existence, their ousia. Yet Plato says it is greater far than ousia, than being itself. It transcends both existence and knowledge. It's the ultimate, self-sufficient, transcendental source of all reality and all intelligibility.
It's the closest his system gets to a single, divine, all-encompassing principle.
I think that's right. And this journey, from the shadows of the physical world to the ultimate light of the good, is mapped out visually in his image of the divided line. This shows how the soul progresses through 4 stages of cognition.
It maps the two main worlds, right? The visible world, which only allows for opinion, and the intelligible world, which allows for true knowledge.
Exactly. And there are 2 stages in each.
Let's detail those 4 segments, starting from the bottom, the lowest level of certainty.
The lowest segment of the visible world is shadows and reflections. Acacia. This is just the perception of images, shadows, reflections, the least reliable kind of cognition. Above that, still in the visible world, you have real objects, pistis, or belief. This is our everyday belief in the physical things of nature and art. Together, these 2 make up the realm of opinion.
Then the line crosses over into the intelligible world, the realm of absolute knowledge.
And this is a massive leap in certainty. The 3rd segment is the world of the mathematical sciences, dianoia, or understanding. Here, the mind deals with abstract concepts like geometry, which are eternal and unchanging. However, it's still only the 3rd stage.
Why? Math seems pretty certain.
It is, but mathematicians use sensible images, they draw diagrams, and most importantly, they rely on hypotheses or axioms without ever analyzing or proving their first principles. They just assume, for example, that odd and even numbers exist, and then they draw conclusions from those assumptions.
So math is certain, but it's not the ultimate certainty because it's built on unproven starting points.
Exactly. The philosopher's job is to prove those starting points. And that brings us to the highest segment, pure ideas dialectic, noesis, reason, or mind. This is the stage where the mind ascends beyond all hypotheses. It uses dialectic, the method of pure intellectual discussion, to grasp the idea of good directly.
No diagrams, no assumptions.
No, the mind works only with forms, seeking the unhypothetical first principle of everything. And then once it grasps that, it descends again, walking firmly only in the region of ideas. This is the activity of the true philosopher king.
This whole conversion process, the soul moving from the sensory shadows to the pure light of the good, is captured so perfectly in his allegory of the cave.
It's one of the most famous images in all of history for a reason. The cave is the world of sight and sense. The prisoners are us mistaking manufactured shadows on a wall for reality. The fire behind them is like the sun of our sensory world, and the entire ascent out of the cave is the painful, difficult path to knowledge,
The liberation of the soul.
and its journey toward the true light, which is the idea of good.
And the experience of seeing the truth outside the cave is overwhelming. It's blinding at first.
It's intensely painful. And the philosopher, once they're illuminated by the good, they don't want to go back. They're unwilling to return to the political assemblies and courts, back to the den, because the concerns down there, the honors and glories the prisoners are fighting over, seem utterly worthless compared to the truth.
But, and this is crucial for his state, the enlightened philosopher must be compelled to go back down.
They must descend to rule for the common good. Knowledge creates duty.
So the whole lesson is that the process isn't about implanting sight into a blind person. It's about reorienting a faculty the soul already has.
Yes. Conversion is just turning the faculty of sight your intelligence, which is indestructible toward the light. And this requires stripping away the leaden weights of pleasure and desire that bind the soul to the earth and focus it on lower things. This intellectual and moral turning is the singular mission of Plato's entire education system. Now, given the intense rigor and the demands of this ideal state, this aristocracy, Plato knew it would be very difficult to sustain.
It seems almost impossible.
So he dedicates time to charting the inevitable decline, the perversion of political constitutions, which also mirrors the moral decay of the individual citizen's soul. And this sequence he lays out is more of a logical order of thought, not necessarily a strict historical timeline.
It starts with the ideal aristocracy, which is ruled by the rational element. What causes the first fall from grace?
The first decline is to a democracy. This is a state ruled by honor, ambition, and military spirit. He's probably thinking of Sparta here. It arises when the ruling class fails to rigorously enforce that community of property and wives. Corruption starts to creep in through secrecy and the beginning of a love for private gain. The focus shifts from wisdom to martial prowess and honor.
And that focus on honor eventually gives way to a pure love of money, which brings us to oligarchy.
In the oligarchical state, wealth becomes the only criterion for power. Political privileges are legally restricted to the rich. The desire for profit dictates everything. And the key evil here is that it divides the city into two nations. The rich and the poor, constantly struggling against each other. The rich are afraid to arm the poor, and the massive accumulation of debt creates this huge, idle class of paupers, a sickness that guarantees instability.
And that instability, driven by debt and social division, inevitably leads to a revolution that installs a democracy.
A democracy is born from the excess of wealth and luxury in the oligarchy, which encourages expensive, unnecessary habits in the young. It's defined by an excess of freedom, the equality of all desires, and a completely variegated political life. The citizens start to reject all laws and authority, thinking one desire is as good as another.
He even says that slaves and animals are perceived to have unconstrained freedom.
Yes, that rejection of constraint and hierarchy leads swiftly to anarchy.
And the ultimate corruption, which is born from the anarchy caused by this excess of freedom in a democracy, is tyranny.
When a state demands absolute, excessive freedom, the chaos that results forces a need for order, a need for a strong protector. A demagogue rises to power, pretending to safeguard the people. This man, the tyrant, crushes all his rivals and rules entirely by fear, eventually becoming an absolute slave to his own unruly lowest passions, a multitudinous beast, as Plato calls him.
So the tyrannical man is actually the most miserable of all men. He lives in perpetual terror, enslaved by his own inner sickness.
Exactly. And this entire detailed analysis of justice and injustice is ultimately validated in the final book of the Republic, where he looks beyond this life, in the myth of
This is the concluding vision, right? It reveals the eternal consequences of living a just life.
It's a very powerful vision. Is a soldier who is thought to be dead for 12 days. He returns to life and recounts the journey of the soul after death. The just are judged and sent upward to experience bliss. The unjust are sent downward to be punished tenfold for every evil deed over a 1,000-year journey.
And after this 1,000 years, all the souls have to return to this eternal mechanism that binds the universe, the distaff of necessity, and choose their next life.
Exactly. The fates present the souls with models of lives. Lives that might combine great beauty with hidden suffering, or immense power with deep vice. And the critical lesson, the message for all of humanity, is that virtue is free, orate in Asia.
The choice is up to you.
The choice of the next life rests entirely with the individual soul, and the choice has to be made with an iron sense of truth and right, judging the intrinsic nature of the life, not its external trappings or its reputation. This reinforces the entire argument of the book. What matters is the internal condition of your soul, because that condition dictates your eternal destiny.
And the message is complete. The just man is the happiest, even if no one sees it, because his happiness is that internal order and harmony of his soul, a happiness that will be eternally rewarded.
Wow. We have journeyed through Plato's immense and sweeping system, from that initial Socratic challenge that forces you to confess you know nothing, to the search for an unchanging reality in the forms.
This huge system.
We saw him construct a perfectly unified, radically censored state ruled by reason, and then finally look to the eternal destiny of the soul in the myth of His blueprint really defines not just metaphysics, but education, politics, and the very nature of human desire and knowledge. So let's briefly reiterate the central statements that really form the bedrock of this deep dive, the takeaways you should carry forward with you. First, that absolute distinction between knowledge and opinion. True knowledge comes from the eternal, unchanging ideas, the forms, not from the constantly shifting, deceiving sensory experience of the material world.
Second, the tripartite soul. Justice isn't an external act, it's internal harmony and universal order, achieved when the rational element rules the spirited and desiring appetites.
Third, the ideal state. For Plato, perfection requires radical unity, strict cultural censorship, and governance exclusively by the reason of philosopher kings.
And fourth, the idea of good. This ultimate transcendental principle is the source of all truth and being. It stands even higher than knowledge itself, and it's accessible only through a rigorous dialectical ascent.
So Plato insists that the just man is happy, the happiest man of all, whether he is seen or unseen by gods or by men.
And if that's true, if the ultimate reward of justice isn't external reputation or power or wealth, but the internal harmony and well-being of the soul itself, how radically does that challenge our modern ideas of success and morality, which are so often measured by visibility and external recognition?
Think about that next time you encounter injustice in the world, and consider where true power really resides.
A deep question for another day. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.